Coming up on episode 172 of the Author Stories podcast.
And how the most damaging addiction we have in our civilization, the one that does the most harm, and it's killing us right now, is self-righteous indignation.
Hey there, Author Story listeners. This is Kevin Tomlinson from Draft to Digital, and I know that you have a book sitting there just waiting to get out to the world, and you're kind of wondering what the next steps are. So that's why you need to go visit drafttodigital.com/authorstories. That's draft2digital.com/authorstories. And that's where you're going to find all the help you need to go from having a book on your hard drive to having it on someone's Kindle or iPad or other reading device. So go visit drafttodigital.com/authorstories right now.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast with Hank Garner. Visit hankgarner.com for all of the show notes, and while you're there, browse through the archives. There's 171 previous shows for you to dig through, and subscribe to the show while you're there. The links are in the right-hand sidebar. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week. ThirdScribe.com is there to connect readers and writers. We've talked about it so many times. Writers, you need an author platform. ThirdScribe can help you do that. Go visit Rob and the good folks at ThirdScribe.com and let them help you do that. Thanks to Ed Gosney at edgosney.com for sponsoring the show. Ed runs a blog that is fantastic. If you love comics like I do, go visit Ed's Cool Comics in My Collection blog. He documents each week comics in his collection, but he does it in a really fascinating way where he hones in on a topic and brings out the very best in comics. Go visit edgosney.com. I'd also like to thank a new sponsor this week, Aaron Saylor, with his new book, Sewerville, a Southern gangster novel. Welcome to Sewerville, one of America's shadowy corners where meth dealers and pillheads run rampant, where violence courses in the blood and death whispers in every ear. In the small town known as Sewerville, crime is every family's business, and these days, business is better than it's ever been. Described as the Sopranos in Appalachia, Sewerville is violent and profane, but in the end it's also deeply moving. Consider it an essential tale of modern crime in the American South. Pick up Sewerville by Aaron Saylor, link in the show notes. I'd also like to thank Daniel Smith and Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. This is a fantastic series if you love pulp fiction. I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about those great books and magazines and comics that we read as youngsters. This is pulp fiction at its very best. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned is a monthly release. You will not be disappointed. Click on the link in the show notes for the very best in pulp fiction. Also, be sure to stick around after the show for an audio clip from Richard Glebes and his Jason Crane series. Thank you for listening.
With the oppressive transport authority controlling every aspect of their existence, Leah and her father do what they can to carve out a good life for themselves. Leah spends her nights scavenging and risking capture as she hunts for salvage her father can trade for food and clothing. When Leah takes a bag of salvage from a dying stranger, she and her father are plunged into the world of transport and its war against the terrorist organization, Trace. As transport closes in, Leah will need to decide who she can trust and how far she's prepared to go to save her father's life. The Girl in the City by Philip Harris is the first book in a thrilling dystopian science fiction trilogy set in Michael Bunker's world of Pennsylvania. If you enjoyed books like The Hunger Games and Divergent, you'll love The Girl in the City and its sequels, The Girl in the Wilderness and The Girl in the Machine. All three books are available now on Amazon Kindle. Check the show notes for a link. A thirst for revenge sends one man on a deadly journey through the galaxy in the adrenaline-pumping new novel, Galactic Satori Chronicles. Written by Nick Breaker and Paul E. Hicks, this raucous sci-fi adventure introduces Asher, a young man whose world is turned upside down when he discovers that his fiance's death has been directly caused by an imminent alien invasion. In a desire to better understand humans in order to destroy them, these aliens are projecting their consciousness onto unsuspecting men and women, and in the process are learning exactly how to use humanity's own selfishness and greed as weapons against them. Fueled by emotions that the aliens will never understand, Asher bands together with a group of friends. These 4 MIT co-eds are more than meets the eye and go to battle with those who are intent on destroying our planet. Asher takes the fight from Earth to an alien spaceship and back again. A fight that will either save the planet or doom it. The first installment in an upcoming series, Galactic Satori Chronicles, is an engrossing look at the manipulation of time, mental projection, futuristic technology, and of course, aliens. By Nick Breaker and Paul E. Hicks. Pick up Galactic Satori Chronicles now on Amazon. Link in the show notes.
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I'm very excited today to have David Brin on the show. Welcome to the show, sir.
Sure thing, Hank, and hello to all your listeners.
Mr. Brin, I have a question that I begin each interview with, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Well, I have vague impressions of wanting to from a very early age. I come from generations of writers. My father was a journalist and a fairly well-known poet, and his father as well, as an immigrant. But I have to say that there was a teacher in my 5th grade who, back in those days, you see, 20% of the curriculum was entirely up to the teacher. So the year before that, in 4th grade, we learned all about bees, and now I have beehives.
Nice.
I figure it's patriotic.
Right.
So anyway, she put at least 20% of her time, and you can't do this anymore as a teacher. You don't have that freedom.
Right.
She put at least 20% of her time and energy into teaching creative writing. And as I look back on the things she taught, almost all of them were 100% wrong.
Oh, goodness.
She taught us to use Tom Swifties and to use wild, just extravagant adjectives,
right,
and lengthy descriptions, and it was all wrong. But I started a novel. I only, I was 11, so I got about 3 chapters, very crude stuff. But interestingly enough, it was about a talking dolphin. How about that? And of course, later on, my 2nd novel, Startide Rising, has dolphins in space. Now, what more do you need as a movie pitch?
Right.
Hey, JB, now that we got all that Avatar computer stuff, dig it. Dolphins.
Right.
In space.
Right.
Huh?
Oh, man. So many people answered that question and have a great story like you of an elementary school age. And a lot of times there's a person that helps to kindle that fire in the would-be writer. And even when they give us bad advice or show us wrong mechanics, there's something infectious about someone pouring that into a young person that stays with us. How fascinating.
Oh, well, yes. Well, just the notion, yes, you could do this. This is something you could do. And this is one of the reasons why I and the other killer bees in science fiction have been very active in trying to get the science fiction fandom and the science fiction community to pay attention to its feedstock. Because if you go to the sci-fi conventions, you see that science fiction fandom is aging.
Right.
It used to be the conventions, the World Cons especially, would get larger and larger as time went by. But the largest world science fiction convention of all times was the one that I owned. It's not the one I was guest of honor at. That was the 2007 Yokohama one in Japan. But it was the one I owned as the bright young whippersnapper that everybody hushed their conversations and pointed at as I walked by. This was the LA Worldcon in 1984, and I was the hot shit. I was the and everybody should get to be the hot shit.
At least once.
Yes, well, Andy Warhol, there are different levels of abiding fame or chronic fame, which sounds a lot like something bad. And I have more than average, although, curse you, Stephen King. But then there's acute fame, and that's when you're the person of the moment. And Andy Warhol was right about that to some degree. You can go from 15, minutes to 15 months, but it's still, it's only at its max for a brief time. But in any event, that was the largest of all the World Cons, and we made the mistake of holding it in LA. As a result, it was just mobbed with people who saw how fun conventions were, and that's when you saw the takeoff of things like Comic-Con and costume cons and the major specific cons that now attract an awful lot of the money and the attention. Right. So the literary conventions have sort of faded back. But that's drifted a bit from my topic, which is that I offered one of the very, very first education-oriented prizes on the web. It was called Webs of Wonder. I ran it on the analog site when the web was brand new. And it was offering $1,000 a year for anyone to develop a website that helped teachers to use good science fiction to teach a standard curriculum, like physics or history. And the first year, someone did it with a great site having to do with my novel, The Postman, and its relationship to U.S. history. And, of course, it won. The next year, there just weren't enough entries. The web was too early, but I'm thinking of restarting it.
I think that's a fantastic idea.
Well, we're also starting something else. It's the centennial year of Arthur C. Clarke. And we've established at UCSD the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. And at the Clarke Center, we have a lot of cool activities. But one we're gearing up for is called TASAT, TASAT. And we're hoping to have it up and running in a few months. And this arose because I do a lot of, there are about a dozen hard science fiction authors who were consulted a lot by industry and by government agencies. Last October, I spoke keynote at events for Boeing, IBM, GE, and Viacom, and about 6 months before that, the CIA. So, and just last week, I spoke at the Naval Postgraduate School about threats and dangers to our republic. We could talk about that. But the thing is that very often I run into people who are very concerned, grumps, and they say, we come up with these new things, and it seems obvious how to interpret them. But then we find out that we made a mistake, and that mistake was mentioned in some sci-fi story. And I said, yeah, you badly need to have access to the background literature of thought experiments that have been pulled in science fiction stories and novels for a century. Well, TASAT is an effort to do that. In TASAT, anybody will be able to show up, but especially folks who might have a real concern and say, we think we might have a first contact situation here, but it's ambiguous. Or we think that this might be a new type of pollution. Or we think this or this or this. Or I am just a person who's curious about this, and I'm not admitting that we've run into anything like this. I just want to know. is there a story about something like this? And so we'd have, we aim to have a bunch of fans and a few scholars who would be able to say, yeah, I recall there was a story in Analog in 1965 in which it was a situation very much like you're describing, and the author showed that the initial assumption of what was going on was wrong, that it was the opposite. Because, you see, that's what we do in stories. If it's the obvious answer, where's the fun of that?
Right. And you talked about protecting the stock of making sure that science fiction has new blood and new people to carry on this rich tradition that you're talking about. And I was thinking when we were talking about the cons, it seems like a lot of these conventions now are pop culture conventions, and not so much about the literary tradition. What can we, as maybe con attendees, do to preserve the true history of this great tradition that we have?
Well, one thing you can do is to try to get TASAT-like panels at the media conventions. I get free membership every year at Comic-Con, because sometimes they throw me on some panel with a bunch of comic artists and movie makers, and I speak up from the far end of the table for the literary stuff, for the mother genre of our bold expansiveness. Now, I've written graphic novels. One of them even came in third for the big award in France, where they adore this stuff. So I'm not trying to be a prude here. I've consulted as the science consultant on TV shows and movies. So I have nothing against mass media. I have some things against mass media that's less successful or high quality than it might have been. Kevin Costner, Postman. In fact, actually, you can ask me about that. In my experience, I'm much more cheerful about that. I always surprise people by how cheerful I am about that. But the thing we really need to do as lovers of the literary stuff is to get a trench coat and stand outside junior high schools. And when the kids come out, open one side of the trench coat and show a bunch of books on the inside of the trench coat and say, a little Heinlein, a little girl, a little Anne McCaffrey. The first one's free.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
But in effect, that's what we need to do. And we tried back in the 90s and early aughts. Greg Benford, Greg Baer, Werner Vinci, Nancy Kress, myself, Catherine Asaro. We tried to persuade fan groups all over the country to look at their charters. And the charter almost always says that the purpose of their fan group is to spread the love of science fiction literature. And they're betraying their charter unless they've adopted a local junior high school teacher or invited all the local junior high school teachers to come to their convention for one day for free and bring one of their kids. I mean, how would that hurt?
Nothing.
That teacher's not coming anyway. You might as well offer a free convention membership to this fun local convention to, a few dozen. And then what you do is you introduce all these junior high school, science fiction loving junior high school teachers to each other. They exchange email addresses and they form a group. And they wind up being the support group for teachers teaching science fiction in their town. It was a very simple idea, and it was met with some tentative interest in the Midwest and the East, and with active loathing hostility by the fan groups in the West Coast. And the difference we finally figured out is this. Almost no fans, science fiction fans, in the Western United States have procreated. Almost none of them have had kids.
Oh, what a sad state of affairs.
So they consider the kids showing up at their convention to be interlopers. Now, I'm being terrible right now. Naturally, I am exaggerating, and I'm poking at my own side of the country, which is what you're supposed to do. What I just said is not strictly true. But the point is, it points out that there's an attitude in science fiction that's a lot like the old Shakers. It's like, breeding? Breeding? Who, us? And the way we breed in science fiction is only partly genetically. Right. But when we do have kids, unlike almost any other cult, our kids stay.
Right.
And our cult message, our cult belief system is the kid comes up to the parents and says, I don't like your authors. I have my own sci-fi authors, and I think independently. To which the sci-fi parents say, oh, good, really? Oh, I'm succeeding. Kind of takes a little bit of the relish and joy out of rebelling.
Right.
But I've been talking a lot about another kind of teenage rebellion that people are afraid of, and that's artificial intelligence. And whether or not we can see to it that the new children we create, the AIs and the robots, will be just like the old ones, infuriating, perhaps patronizing, and they may even say, destroy all humans, like teenagers sometimes do. But they seldom actually do go forth and destroy all humans. I think that we need to cheerfully recognize that it's our job to be parents, and that swings back to my own work, because this is a theme that I talk about in my novel Existence.
And this was something I was going to ask you about next, is that your work definitely has these threads of themes that run through them. And talk a little bit about that. You have a knack for predicting things that inevitably come to pass. Talk a little bit about that in your book Existence.
Well, some of my fans keep a wiki tracking my predictions, especially from Earth. And Earth can get pretty scary. Also, my nonfiction book, The Transparent Society, I got sent all sorts of email right after 9/11 saying P206, and I finally figured out it was to go to page 206 of the Transparent Society, on that page, there's a passage that says, and this was 1997, that says, okay, so what powers might our government ask for if we suffer a calamity? Like, for example, if bombers ever brought down both World Trade Center towers. Ow! And then page 156, there's this passage predicting cop cams, that all the cops would wear cameras, and then ghetto youths would respond by wearing GoPro cameras of their own. And of course, this is happening on our streets right now as we speak.
Does it ever scare you when you have an idea for a new story, and it seems outlandish? Do you ever think, this actually could happen, or is that the genesis of the story? Are you looking for things that could happen and just running a thought experiment to see what the inevitable conclusion of this would be?
I mentioned that I spoke at the Naval Postgraduate School a few days ago, and I spoke for 3 hours because I combined all my national security slides, including some from 1998. And gauze dropped in the room when they saw a 1988 slide that said, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, our national security concerns have been mostly with terrorism. We tend to forget that rival states will come back and that they will use techniques that we haven't seen yet, but that were used across human history. And these techniques include suborning our leaders, inciting social strife among Americans, creating distrust between the professions and average working people, and including distrust of the intelligence community and the military officer corps. All of this was on one slide. And I remember back in the 90s when I first presented this that I got snide grimaces. And but I got no snide grimaces this time.
It's just the news of the day now.
You asked if I'm glad when I'm proved right. There are times, and then there are times.
Right. Oh man. When you are well, first off, what was the first novel that you wrote, completed, and got published?
Well, that was Sundiver, and it was nicely received, but it didn't make a gigantic splash. I was a nobody. It was my second novel, Startide Rising, that made me somebody pretty much overnight. Sundiver was following my own advice. When I teach writing, I always suggest to writing students, that their first novel be a murder mystery. And the reason is very simple. You have to learn how to be fair to your readers. You have to learn how to be a sadist, both fair and a sadist, because the best thing that you can ever hear from a customer, from a reader, is if they can say, damn you, I almost lost my job because of you. Because they're unable to put the book down. Now, at the end of every one of my novels, you'll find 40 or 50 names of pre-readers who I thank. And if they simply say nice things, then I drop them from my list. One of my more famous aphorisms is Cetocate. Criticism is the only known antidote to error. And the biggest error is to let people be bored. So even though I'm reputed to write pretty well, or even sometimes write pretty, I'm known for putting in science. I don't let either get in the way of getting on to some action and moving the plot along. This is almost compulsive on my part. So if I've had 3 pages of science or lyrical descriptions of the Earth, as in my novel Earth, or in existence, lyrical sections having to do with space or intelligent life, the itch builds, and the more pages I went without anything happening, the larger the explosion has to be. That's just that's just the side of me that needs to be a crowd pleaser. But I didn't answer why a murder mystery. In any genre like science fiction, if you don't think that you're developing the plot arc quite right to get a really aha moment from the readers when they figure out what's going on, and boy does existence have an aha moment. I get a lot of mail on that one. The way to hide it is inside science fiction, you add more science. In fantasy, you add more dragons. In romance, you add more kissy-kissy. But in a murder mystery, when you find out who done it, there's no hiding.
Right.
Either you did it right, and the reader hates herself for having not got it, but loves the fact that it was so enjoyable to be surprised. But enjoyable to be surprised when it all fits what came earlier. Now that's a mix, that's a blend, that's hitting a target, that's hitting the sweet spot. And it's hard to do. And you have to learn how to do it. And nothing teaches you how to do it better than writing a murder mystery. So Sundiver was a murder mystery in which the corpse of the murder victim gets dumped into the sun. It makes CSI really hard.
Right. You mentioned The Postman earlier, and that movie, I think there are people that love it and people that maybe have not enjoyed it the way you wish they would. What was that experience like, taking something that you had written, see it on the big screen, and then to see it kind of eclipsed by this other huge movie that came out at the same time?
Well, Costner sent out an email, and yes, there were emails in 1997, Virginia. He sent out an email, and yes, he even included the original writer, which is something. He sent an email saying, "We've got it made. Our only competition this Christmas release is James Cameron's little remake about a sinking boat." I guess which was the iceberg.
Right.
But look, when they make a movie of your book, and I hope they do, you want 5 things. You want to be paid a lot. You want to be treated really well. You want them to consult you. You want it to be a great movie, and you want it to be a successful movie. Yes, another thing, and you want it to be faithful to the heart. I only got one of those. But it was really the only important one, and that is that for some reason, even though he was a bit of a jerk to me, and I never understood why. I understood why. It was Hollywood. I think he probably is at his core a pretty nice guy, but he was a jerk to me. So what? I have a thick skin. He was faithful to the heart of my book. The heart message of my book is exactly the same as the heart message of his movie. He scooped out and threw away all the brains, but the heart matters more. His main character was exactly my main character, with 80 fewer IQ points. And the other aspect to that movie is that he's probably one of the greatest cinematographers ever to live. Costner cannot make a movie that's not drop-dead gorgeous. You remember Dances with Wolves. The Postman is probably one of the dozen or so most beautiful motion pictures in visuals and music ever made. So what do we have here? We have something that's gorgeous, big-hearted, and dumb. Well, gorgeous, big-hearted, and dumb has its place.
It absolutely does.
Worse things have happened in the history of the world. He might have betrayed me much worse. And the final capping factor is that Kevin Costner gave me something to say to people at airports.
Right.
So all told, it's better that it happened than that it didn't happen. Now, Paul Anderson couldn't say that about his movie when a bunch of Germans made a comedic Monty Python version of The High Crusade, and that would have been fine, but they did it badly. So you have stories that are betrayed, and then you have stories in which, hey, look, I didn't have $80 million to make a movie. He did.
Right. And he chose my vehicle
and
to
besides,
do it.
In life, I'm just too busy to be mad all the time.
Right.
It's just, I know you and I both know people who are angry all the time. They're addicted to anger. And this is what the root behind probably the filthiest human habit, which is called gossip. Talking about people behind their backs, stabbing them behind their backs. One of my predictions I've registered is that within 10 years, once we've included almost every minority group that can be, once we get past our current Civil War. We're in phase 8 of the American Civil War. Once we get past that, I believe a civil rights movement will coalesce around the evils of gossip. But that's another story entirely. I gave a speech at the National Institutes on Drugs and Addiction about addiction and how the most damaging addiction we have in our civilization, the one that does the most harm, and it's killing us right now, is self-righteous indignation. And the left is not completely innocent there. I mean, there are definitely, some people, maybe 10% of the left who are just as bad as 90% of the right. There I went, and I broke my promise to my wife, and I went political. but I'm known as Contrary Brin. That's my my blog, and I'll poke at anybody who I think is being dogmatic, indignantly dogmatic, and that includes me.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. One final question before you have to go, and I know you're short on time today. You do a lot of speaking to organizations, and you mentioned that just a little bit ago. But I saw on your website that you have spoken with SETI, and there are lots of announcements all the time. It seems that as our technology grows and our capacity to understand things grows, NASA made an announcement a couple of weeks ago about some new planets they discovered. Do you think that it's inevitable that we will encounter other life? And if so, do you think that our science fiction tradition has done a good job of preparing us for that?
Well, no other tradition could prepare us. And science fiction has the religious cult focus that the author wants to try to present something surprising that people haven't seen before. So we're poking at the fringes of the probable, the possible, the plausible, the improbable, and the impossible. And all of these are categories that we poke at in science fiction. Now, as an astrophysicist, I don't actually practice my trade very much anymore because this civilization pays me more to blather stories or to give speeches or to blah, 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 lots of hot air. But I do keep my hand in, and I publish some papers now and then. And one area that I am an expert is SETI. I have some of the classic papers in the field. And I've cataloged 100 explanations for the Fermi paradox, and that is why we haven't seen any signs so far. And it's not just radio or optical, it's the fact that the Earth was prime real estate for 2 billion years with an oxygen atmosphere and nobody to defend it. And yet we see no signs whatsoever that it was ever colonized. And we would see such signs, by the way. I've been poking at the Fermi paradox for years. I mean, my novel Existence, all 3 of my short story collections, The River of Time, Otherness, and the most recent, Insistence of Vision, which I think is my best. In all 3, there are about maybe a quarter of the stories poke at the Fermi paradox, at possible hypotheses, improbable or plausible ones, as to why it does seem that we are alone in a universe that ought to be teeming with life. And I've also been very active in the community of scientists who have resigned from all the SETI commissions in protest because some people at some of these SETI institutes want to start shouting into the cosmos. They're no longer content to look. And this is stupid. You want to see it illustrated? See one of the greatest science fiction novels of the last 10 years, The Three-Body Problem by Liu Cixin. That's Cixin. It only won the Hugo Award for Best Novel last year. And it's just magnificent. It also has done great good for the world by expanding the reputation of science fiction in China. When it won the Hugo Award, they're making a movie there, and it upped the game of science fiction in China, where they desperately need the probing and questioning attitude that underlies science fiction. So yeah, I'm involved in SETI. I'm involved in a lot of the arguments there. I've cataloged explanations for the Fermi paradox, and those that I haven't put in scientific papers, I've put in stories. So my most recent book is, as I said, Insistence of Vision. It's my most recent short story collection. It has some stories that were in Best of the Year. I think it's my best. And also a book called Chasing Shadows that just came out, hot off the presses. It's a theme anthology. We have a lot of those in science fiction that explore this concept or that concept. And this is the first one that ever anthologized lots of different authors, Neil Stevenson, and William Gibson, Werner Vinge, Aliette de Bodard, Cat Rambo, a bunch of the best science fiction authors, all of them on the theme of what might the future be like if light and transparency flood our world. Because, if you look at most Michael Crichton stories, the plot is driven by somebody having done something stupid in secrecy. What happens when secrecy starts becoming impossible? Will we have Big Brother, or will we look back at power? It's answering surveillance with what's called sousveillance, S-O-U-S. And if we thus prevent Big Brother, will we have a judgmental society of conformity and little brothers like Ray Bradbury portrayed in Fahrenheit 451? Or will we respond to this flood of light by becoming better people? Interesting questions. And that's called Chasing Shadows.
Chasing Shadows. We're going to send everyone over to pick up a copy of Chasing Shadows. Where can people connect with you if they're not familiar with your work, or maybe they want to read more about what you're doing?
I have one of the most lavish websites on the web. It was a runner-up for an award in that regard. I think the bloated Webby. It's a gigantic site, and it's davidbrin.com. I think it's larger than the sites of most corporations. So you'll find all sorts of crap there. From books and movies and philosophy and philanthropy and lots of cool videos. You want to watch a video about how we might lift the Earth, move it out of the way of the sun that's getting hotter, and we'll make the planet uninhabitable in 100 million years. Lots of arm waving, hot air, blah 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 blah, and even an occasional book.
Nice. Mr. Brin, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Sure thing, Hank. And if I gave your audience the impression that here's a guy who's full of himself, yes, but I've been punished for it. My head gets so large that it actually looks like I'm bald.
I have this.
When I haven't
the
lost
same problem.
Yeah, I know, but I haven't lost any hair. It's just the size of the
You just grew out of it. I got you.
But the thing is, here's the trick, Hank. For all you egotists out there, is if you can be jocular about it and make fun of yourself, people will forgive it. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Best of luck to you all, and to us all. We need it.
Stay tuned now for this audio clip from Richard Gleaves' General of the Dead. You can pick up the entire Jason Crane series at Amazon.com. There's a link in the show notes.
How do we know when we are watched? Do the eyes of a predator reflect moonlight, focusing it on our skin? Do we feel 2 little spots of white on our neck and bristle with fear? I knew I was watched, and I could feel its quality. A man's gaze, like yearning eyes in a smoky tavern. I felt drawn to it. I skirted the pond, and beneath a vine-choked bower, I found the horseman's severed head. The braid at the back had snagged on some twig, turning the dead eyes upward. A dragonfly rode his cheek. It fled as I reached for him. I took hold of his braid, like the vine of a pumpkin, and drew him from the water. We sat together on a mossy log, he and I. Oh, I felt such joy to look upon his face again. I wiped the mud from his lips and nostrils, preparing him to be buried. The Domine could not watch the graveyard always, I decided. I would wait for night to fall, steal a shovel, and do the work myself. A trio of colonial soldiers were raising a redoubt nearby. Thomas the gravedigger brought them his own long-handled shovels. He stood and watched the soldiers work with professional interest, as dirt was his trade. Autumn leaves snagged in his hair, but he was too busy tale-telling to notice. The morning's dark business had quite bewitched his imagination. But the big one was a Hessian. One of them horsemen. Head lopped off by a cannonball. He'll be a-haunting this place now, he will. With a hip-hip and a clippity-clop. I'll be seeing headless spooks in my burying ground. Just you wait. And if he can't find his own head, he'll be wanting one of ours. Lord love us. He shivered, hands in pockets. The soldiers laughed at him, but the boy was serious. Our legend had begun to spin itself already, from the lips of our tow-headed gravedigger. Fact and fiction going their separate ways, severed, as they often are. I listened with fascination. I had always loved a ghost story, and I'd never witnessed the birth of one before. Ghost stories are a form of history. If we say, 3 men died building that church and they forever haunt it, we keep those souls alive in death. Ghost stories are the past bleeding into the present, demanding acknowledgement of those unseen presences all around us, in our street names and genealogies and on our crumbling headstones. The tragedy of Old Willow, the fall of the horseman, the fate of you or I. These tales are forgotten by academic historians, who chronicle only great men. But our small lives are remembered, so long as our ghost stories are told. That is why we must tell them and retell them, and keep them kindled in the hearts of our children.
Listening to the Author Stories podcast.